Hello, everybody. My name is Rick Newman, and I am the director here at the museum, the American Museum of Tort Law, and I am really delighted to welcome you all here tonight. I'm still pleasantly surprised that this technology is working, so this is good. Welcome. This is our second Leaders in the Law presentation series, which was a program envisioned to get really remarkable lawyers to come here and talk about really remarkable achievements. I have long known that if you read law books, you get the legal stuff, the opinions and the dry reasoning, but all the juice and all the vitality and all of the human aspect gets lost. So this is an opportunity for you and for the people watching these videos to learn from real masters about the thinking and the feeling and the heart and the courage and the fight that goes on in fighting for justice. So we are really fortunate tonight to have Thomas Fortune Fay, who is a remarkable lawyer. Here are the facts. He's a member of the Bar in Maryland and the District of Columbia, a graduate of the University of Notre Dame and the Rutgers School of Law. He's a former president of the Trial Lawyers Association of Washington, D.C., and in 2001 was named Trial Lawyer of the Year by that organization. And none of that is what I care about. What I care about is what Tom has done. He has been a fighter. It's like something out of a novel. He has taken on state-sponsored terrorism and beat them. He fought with Congress. He fought with the administrations. It took him years. He went to Congress to get laws passed to allow people. Did you know that until 1996, victims of state-sponsored terrorism, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, had no legal recourse? There was evidence. People knew these are the government sponsoring people blowing up buses and barracks. Nothing could be done until Thomas Fortune Fay stepped in to the battle and won. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is really a remarkable honor tonight that we are able to present to you my friend Thomas Fortune Fay.
If you come and sit over there,
you can sit right here.
You bet.
So the format of the evening is that I will ask some interview questions, and then we will have the master class. Tom will speak to you all. So with that, let me start with the question that's been on my mind all along. What was the moment, the defining moment that led you to say, I'm taking this on, fighting terrorism?
It was 1955, 54, 55, and we were living down in South Carolina. My father was an engineer working on the building of a hydrogen bomb plant there. And we lived in town. Now, at that time in South Carolina, segregation was the law of not only the law of the land, it was like it was handed down from up above. I remember about the second day we were there, a neighbor came over and said, it was in the middle of the summer, this is pretty hot. I got a couple passes here for the swimming pool over on the other side of town. Just get on the bus up the road there and tell him you want to go to the swimming pool, the Fermata Club, and he'll drop you off there, and you just walk in and give him the passes. You can stay there all day, and your mother or father can pick you up after that. Okay, and so he and my brother and I got on the bus, went to the back of the bus where the nice big seat all the way across, and sat down. The bus started up. It went about 10 yards, came to a grinding stop. I thought, God, it must be an engine failure or something. What the hell is happening here? So the bus driver came back and said, you have to move up to the front. I said, I didn't see anyone up in the front. We're the only two people on the bus. He said, no, you have to be back of the line. What line are you talking about? And he pointed to the roof of the bus, and there was this black line across the roof of the bus. You have to be in front of that, and only the black people can sit in the back. And the way this works in, about a year and a half later, there was one of the municipal golf course in Aiken on the 17th hole had an old barn that was actually put together with concrete and all kinds of stuff. And the family, part of the family known as the Royal family, lived there. The Royals had an appropriate name. There have been like, I don't know, 5 or 6 Royals who become governors of the state of South Carolina. And the lady in the family was out digging around with flowers, and a black man of enormous age, he's probably in his 80s or something, grabbed a hold of her, and 2 golfers over on the golf course ran over and pulled him off and called the police, and he took him in and locked him up. There was one judge in the town, and he appointed a neighbor who was a lawyer, a neighbor where we were living, who was a lawyer, to represent him. Now, this was a time on something like this when the jury wouldn't have a single black person on it, absolutely none. And this lawyer tried the case all the way through, brought in people that really knew how the human mind works and knew about this guy's condition, and he got a not guilty on all counts, and he was referred to the state hospital for treatment. And I thought, man, in South Carolina today, if somebody can do that, that's what I want to figure out how to do. I want to figure out how to do this. I mean, you know, if you're going to take a swing at the baseball, let's figure on the damn thing going over the fence. And that's the reason I got into this.
Yeah, that led to the law school and
Yeah.
your career. And then what led to the fight on terrorism? How did you get involved in that crusade?
I got into that because I got a call from a guy that his daughter had been killed in a terrorist event, and he said he'd asked a couple attorneys. He said he couldn't do anything, and that there wasn't any way to do anything to make the people who had done this horrible act pay for it. And I said, well, the fact is, yes, there's no statute today that lets you do that. So let's make a statute. So I sat down and wrote up a statute, and we got a lot of help from a U.S. senator from New Jersey and a U.S. senator from New York, and together they pushed the statute through. And I remember the Secretary of State then got up and said, well, this is a wonderful demonstration, but of course there will never be a case under this statute, and if there is a case, there will never be a judgment under this statute, and if there's a judgment, no one's ever going to collect it. And so I told this to my client, and I said, look, we're not filing this on the basis that we're going to get something that will make an impression. You know, we're going to paint the car red instead of blue, something like, no, we're not going to. We are going to take this case all the way through, and we're going to get a judgment, and then we're going to collect it. So the next thing I did was I called up the Israeli embassy, and I told them I was planning on going to Israel, and I'd like to talk to whoever was their police consultant there at the embassy. And now, luck has a good thing. It was a big part of everything. And I went up and sat down with the guy, and I've seen him since many times, and there was a little back and forth, and where you live, and he said out in Rockville, and said, oh, you have any kids? He said, yeah. They go to the schools, and yeah, they play football. Oh yeah. I said, look, no matter what you decide you want to do or not do, Notre Dame is playing Navy a couple of weeks from now, and I can get tickets. Why don't you bring your kids along, and I'll bring my kids along. We'll all go to the Notre Dame Navy game, and which we did. And he he said, we worked the thing up, and he said, you have to, when you go over there, you have to see my friend Reuven. And I think he knows a lot about this. And so I said, okay. And I went over there with somebody with me to take videos of the thing. And I still remember going up to where Reuven was, which is up in the north of Israel, almost up to the border, the northern border of Israel. And we had rented a car, but one of the things that happens in Israel is the kids that are in the IDF, Israel has a unitary defense system. There's no such thing really as Navy. There are Navy ships and everything, but everyone is in one outfit: Army, Navy, Air Force, the whole bit. And they don't get paid much money, but people pick them up. They see them along the road and take them back. And I stopped, and there were a couple of people there. I said, "Is anyone going up north?" And this kid came over and said, "Yeah, I've got to go on up there. This is where our unit is." I said, "Okay, hop in. You got a ride." And I said, "I'll get as close to it as I can and drop you off and so forth." And we got going down the road. And the second thing I said to him was, "Look, get on the phone here and call this number that I had on a piece of paper." And the lady there does not speak English, and tell her that I'm coming. I have to see Dr. Reuven Paz. And he said, "I can't." I said, "What do you mean? You have an order not to do this or anything?" He said, "No." He said, "I don't speak any of the language here." And I said, "My God, what are you doing toting a gun around and everything?" He said, "Oh, if they're shooting to me, they'll say, shoot there, shoot there." He said, "I get down the ground fast." and he called, and somehow we got through and so forth. And I met a guy by the name of Reuven Paz because of it. Unfortunately, about 3 years ago, Reuven passed away. But my second or third question to Reuven was, what was your situation vis-a-vis the government of Israel and doing things having to do with terrorism and so forth? He said, "I was director of research for Shin Bet, the Israeli National Security Service." And I later found out from my friend back in Washington, he still had a lot of standing in the thing, and from him we found out the way the system worked and so forth. We were able to obtain a recording from a message from Iran to the person who led the attack on the bus, congratulating him on the attack and on killing 7 Israelis. Well, they killed 6 Israelis and 1 American, really, but they thought they were all Israelis. And we use that at trial along with a lot of things. I still wonder. We had the judge that we had was fairly conservative. He's been a Republican his whole life, and fairly conservative. And I thought, gosh, I wonder if we could even get $1 million out of this. Well, after we went all through the trial, and it came out perfectly, they were served with process. They knew they had to reply, and they refused to reply because they said that would be consenting to be in an American court. That's fine. You don't want to consent. That's fine with me. Good. I'd do much better if there's no opposition at all.
Right.
Everybody does. And we about a month later, the judge called up, said, I wrote up something here, and could you have your people come down on Thursday or whatever the date was? about 10 o'clock. And why don't you come over with the guy that was working with me? And so that I'll give you copies of what I've done, and so you can see it. And if you see mistakes in it or something, or you want to talk to me about it, that's fine. So we went over and, as ordered, sat down in his chambers, and he handed each one of us a thing. And I think both of us did what accomplished trial lawyers do. They didn't read up at the top. They read right at the bottom. Did we win, and how much are we getting? And it was yes, and the award is, I think it was $37 million.
Yeah.
And I thought, we're in business.
Yeah, we are in business. See what I mean? Pardon me. This is what I'm saying. Reading the opinions, you don't get this stuff. This is the juice and the vitality. And if it were me, we'd be here all night. But it is you, and it is you, and it is all of us. So at this point, I need to do something special. We have a special treat tonight. And that is, in addition to Thomas Fortune Fay, we have a special guest. We have Caragh Fay, right here. Caragh works with her father. She is an attorney. She is one of the officers of the Washington, D.C. Trial Lawyers Association. She'll be president soon. She may not quite be one of the leaders in the law of this stature yet, but she will be. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce Caragh Fay, and Tom and Caragh will now lead us in this master class. Good job.
Your turn.
Okay. So obviously my dad has just told you about our first case, which was the Flato case. And that case involved a college girl who was an American, was doing one of those studying over abroad programs, went to Israel to study over abroad, and was killed in a bus bombing. And of course, you heard the details of that. From that, lots of other little cases trailed off of that case. Of course, we didn't collect from that. Those were the Flatos. We didn't collect for them for many, many years. And we continued to pass more legislation because the first bit of legislation was just so an American could have a cause of action against Iran. Once you got a judgment, there wasn't anything you could do with it. You couldn't enforce it. You couldn't go after Iran. There wasn't a way to go after any of their assets or figure out what to do with it from there. So that kind of caused a chain reaction of other legislation that we continued to pass. And a lot of other smaller cases that we litigated, the Eisenfelds, the Dukers, Father Django, all situations where Iran was, in those cases, Iran was actually going after Americans who were overseas. And by 2000, we collected on all of the compensatory damages on all of those cases off of Iran's military sales accounts. Of course, in that situation, the government actually helped us, but that was after us going after a lot of little assets here and there. We were very annoying. Our government finally said, yeah, there is a sales account. You guys can collect from it. So after the first set of cases went through, we didn't have any more terrorism cases. We didn't have any in the works, so we sat down and had a meeting with some of the other lawyers who were working on these cases and said, okay, what now? And and actually it was the day that the USS Cole bombing had happened. And so all of us were very affected by the USS Cole bombing, and felt, that maybe there's something there with the military and the history of the military. My dad is a huge military history buff, and he originally right from the start, it was the Beirut bombing, October 23rd, 1983. It was the biggest casualty against the Marine Corps. We have to do that case. And the more we looked into it, the more we kind of went, yeah, this is something. And we have some intelligence officers who work for us, and then we have the Israeli intelligence people, and we had all of them work on it. Do we have evidence of what happened here? What happened? And we kind of backtracked the case and put it all together, and we had a very, very good case against Iran. We had everything we needed against Iran. And so we started picking up these clients, and, you know, I'm sure a lot of the older people in the room have a very detailed image of what that day looked like, but for younger people, we don't. It was really the first serious terrorist attack against the United States by Iran directly. They did not want us in the region. We sent our military troops there as peacekeepers. They weren't even allowed to load their weapon. They were shot at constantly and weren't allowed to load their weapon. And at first things were fine, but it just got worse and worse as our military was in Beirut. And on October 23rd, 1983, it was a Sunday morning. The night before, there was a USO event. So our troops were in good moods and had slept in slightly because they actually partied the night before. It was a Sunday morning. You know, some people were late to their guard duty. You imagine how guilty those people feel. I mean, when it happened, it made a huge stain on our military that we needed to do something about. And what our government decided to do was just pull out, get out of Beirut, and act like it didn't happen. So we started taking these clients in. 241 Marines, sailors, and corpsmen were there. Were killed on that day. And our government also never really counted the survivors, people who were in the building who survived the attack, which was many more, because in any terrorist bombing, this explosion was a truck, one of those big Mercedes European trucks drove in the front door. It was an atrium-like building where all the rooms were all around, and it had about 7, 8 floors. Guards on the top of the building, guards around the building, fences around the building, went right through the fence, pulled into the atrium, and detonated it. And before it detonated, one of our main clients, Mr. Russell, was at the front gate and yelled, "Heads up!"
Key in the case was I wanted to get firsthand information, somebody talking that saw this that could get me the witness that would really plaster them. And I spoke to 2 former intelligence agents, one for the United States, one for a foreign country, and they worked together for an entire year. And finally got a call, "Come on over, I got some news for you." And I went over and said, "Look, we have a guy. This guy was in Hezbollah, but he got disgusted and left, and he's sort of ducking around and back and forth, but he's afraid to come out of Lebanon. If we want, he's willing to give testimony, but we're going to have to go into Lebanon to take the testimony." There was I had a videographer, Vic Holm. Vic would, any kind of thing that was dangerous, Vic was in favor of. You know, you want to drive your car backwards down the street 80 miles an hour? Good, I'll sit there. And, you know, Vic just loved this kind of stuff. And I went over to see him and explained it and said, "Well, what do you think?" He said, "When do we leave?" So okay, we got it all set up. And what we did was Vic and I flew to Israel. Nobody with the exception of one person in my office, knew that I wasn't going where supposedly I was, which was to Israel to talk to some people there. We did go to Israel. We left some stuff there, flew out to Cyprus, put all identification that would identify us Americans in a safe deposit box. We had other identification, and our two intelligence guys had already made their way into Lebanon, and we waited, and a storm came along, and there was only one plane got out that night to go into Lebanon. We got on the plane, and there were a couple of other people there. They were probably local people that were fleeing a bad marriage or something, because we were about the only two otherwise on the plane. Flew into Beirut, and the weather was so bad that the normal constituency there at the airport had all gone home. There were only a couple of guards there with submachine guns. They asked us where we came from and how we get here. And I said, well, how we got here? I said, airplane. And they went, oh, well, okay. And we had these goofy, phony things, and they had never seen them. They looked good to him, looked good. So, okay, fine. And we walked in and met up with our two agents. And 2 nights later, we got in a car, and my recollection of the car is a lot. If you've seen the movie with Marlon Brando about the mafia, and there was one of the brothers got in a car and they took him out on the Brooklyn Bridge and spun the car around or something and came. That was about what the ride was like. And I remember one point we were going down the street, and there were these sheets out with faces on the sheets. And I said, "What the sheets?" He said, "Oh, those are martyrs." And this was a guy that was from there, and those are martyrs who were celebrated as saints because they killed Americans. I said, oh, fine, it's good. And we finally, after going back, forth, and around about and losing anyone who was following us, drove into right near the front of a building. It was like the car was blowing up. Everyone popped out and ran like hell into the building. And there in the building were a couple of associates of our intelligence guys with the man who was a Hezbollah member who was in on the attack. And we took a deposition of him, and he described how they were contacted by Iranian officials. I remember there was one thing, a little booklet sort of, with at least in Iranian symbols, whatever the heck they were, was how to operate a mortar. And it was in Farsi. I couldn't read it, but we got it translated. It was in Farsi. So what was the, you're not going to hand away something like that and so forth. And this guy gave us all of the straight stuff. The only thing that we had that went astray at all was that the lights went out. And Lebanon is so badly shot up that the lights often go out every night. And everybody hit the floor, and anyone who was armed got their armament out. And the lights went back on about a minute later. Well, a minute later, we couldn't see the guy. So where the hell could he go? We had the door locked, and he couldn't have climbed out the window or anything. And finally, the last place we looked was under the couch that he was sitting on, and now he was underneath the couch. It took 4 of us to lift the couch up. I just wonder the guy didn't die of a heart attack. I think he thought, this is it, they're coming to get me. But no, and we got everything done. And then just to put the cap on, it's always nice to have some kind of thing that keeps everybody not worried. The driver of the car drove us to this very nice, wonderful Lebanese French restaurant. We had a great meal, and the next night we snuck out on a plane back to Cyprus, and we used that in the trial. And we had testimony from people that were involved, people that were injured, what happened that day, and so forth. And the bottom line was that at the end, the same judge that had given us $37 million before in the Flato case. Now, at this time, there's a lot more people in it.
811. 811 plaintiffs.
Yeah, and we received an award of $2 billion. I think it's $360 million, wasn't it? About that.
2.659 billion.
She's much better at this stuff than I am. and we got that judgment is done, and we then were able to enforce it because there was a gentleman working in at some connection with a bank up in New York who.
Now, fast forward many years later, so we got a judgment in 2007. We're continuing to do more cases. After the 811, more people showed up. On that day in November of 2007, tons of other plaintiffs found out about this and called. Today we have 1,746 judgments, and we still have about 400 more in litigation. We have about just over $4 billion in judgments on all of those.
Altogether, yeah.
So then in 2004, we found out about these assets against Clearstream that were owned by Bank Markazi, the central bank of Iran, in New York. So, of course, we hire collection attorneys all over the place. The collection attorneys filed suit, and we worked on that forever, trying to actually keep that money. It was actually $4 billion in the beginning, and the money is made up of lots of different accounts. You don't put all your money in one account. So there's stocks and bonds and cash and all kinds of stuff. And half of the money was in what we call electronic fund transaction, an EFT, when you're transferring money, and it was on its way to Luxembourg. So the federal judge in New York ruled that money, because it was an EFT, is no longer our jurisdiction anymore, and we couldn't get it. But the rest of the money, not $2 billion, it was 1.9, I think. Yeah, 1.98 billion we collected on. And been working on that ever since. Of course, there's other attorneys that do these cases now, and some other victims of terrorism groups joined in to try to collect that money as well, and we've allowed them to come in. We kind of work together. We can't fight other groups in our situation, because the minute we do, we're constantly lobbying on Congress to pass new bills so that we can collect other things in different kinds of accounts in different places. And the banking associations and other lobbyist groups go against us. Thank God we're bipartisan, though. Our issue is not a Republican issue, and it's not a Democrat issue. It is bipartisan. So when we pass a bill, we have just as many Republicans as we do Democrats on that bill. And we usually get a lot of support. If there weren't banking lobbyists, we would pass any bill that we wanted. But there are. And so we did a lot of lobbying to keep that money. The $2 billion that we got, and the banks constantly fought us at every corner. We went to the Second Circuit, we went to the Supreme Court, and my dad decided to hire Ted Olson to do our arguments in front of the Supreme Court.
He was born on almost the same day as I was. I mean, how could I resist?
And it helps. He wanted the case. He lost his wife on September 11th. So he had his heart set that he wanted to argue this case. And of course, the defense main argument was, they're not lawyers. These are lobbyists. This is a lobbying thing. They shouldn't be able to win on a case just because they lobbied for it. That's not how our government works. But we won.
Yeah.
They didn't go for it.
No.
It doesn't help that in the middle we lost a justice. We were waiting for a decision.
Yeah. Breyer and Scalia were the two leaders on our side. And a month later, I took my wife down to Florida. She'd been driving me crazy all the time. We were doing all this stuff, and I was never home. And we went over to the racetrack, and the phone rang, and it was Caragh. She said, "Obama dropped dead this morning."
Not
I
Obama.
said, "Not Obama."
Scalia.
Yes, not Obama.
Scalia.
Right. Dropped dead this morning. And I said, "That's not funny." She said, "It isn't for him either. He's dead."
Well, at first he hung up on me and said, "Caragh, that's not funny." Not joking. He really did. Turn on your news.
Just one other thing about this thing. I've told this to all the people that are in the office, all of whom are younger than me. I said, look, enjoy these clients we have and the Marines that we represent, because you're never going to get a group like this again. No one else ever has, and probably we never will, because if we wanted to, for instance, to talk to people up on the Hill and get them on our side on a thing, we didn't bring in professional lobbyists. We called up Caragh on the phone and the other people in the office, and we bring in Marines. And if you think your U.S. representative or U.S. senator is afraid of what might happen in the election, you should get a room full of Marines and say, "What are you going to do, Senator or Representative? You on our side?" And it's, oh man, it's like as if they have we have an 11-man firing squad. They're ready to wipe them out, and I don't blame them. And they should go along with what this is a way. And I always point out when I got criticism on all these things, I point out, I said, in this whole thing, there hasn't been one single drop of Iranian blood spilled. All they had to do was cough up the money that was compensation for the people that they'd killed and injured. That's it. And that's a much more humane way of living than the way they were doing it.
How did you find these assets? Was there a whistleblower? There was some story about a fire escape and some guy passed you information. What was that about?
Well, I've had information passed a lot of ways. No, there was a guy that was in the government that knew a lot about where assets were, and he was willing to give us information on the thing. And we did not dilly-dally when we got information. I mean, if he called me at 5 o'clock in the evening, I'd get a writ done up and over to the U.S. District Court to get issued the next morning, or whatever we had to do. The thing that has to be done is be on top of it all the time, and that's what we did. And what did they do on a fire escape? I'm trying to.
I don't remember. I feel like the fire escape guy was when you were trying to go after the Iranian embassy in D.C. We attached that multiple times.
We twice attached the Iranian embassy, and unfortunately, the U.S. government was successful in getting the thing dumped on the basis that, well, this is a property that's being used for a national political purpose, and no, it isn't. It's completely empty. And I remember one judge said, "What evidence do you have of that?" I said, "Mrs. Goldberg, she's living where the ambassador used to live, and when these people from the government came around and said, 'You got to get out of here,' she told them to drop dead. She paid for the year. Get out of here." God, what a wonderful lady.
Yeah, but so the first set of we haven't paid all of the judgments yet. So even the people the 811 who were in the first case that got a judgment in 2007, we got our first payout in 2016 to the clients, and it paid about 36, 37% of each person's judgment. So it'll be a life work of getting up to 100%, and we only go after compensatory damages, even though we've got billions of punitive damages. Right now there just isn't a way to go after punitives. Every time you go to Congress and ask them to pass a bill or pass an enforcement of some sort on punitive damages, you get laughed at. They don't want to see punitives. They throw you out the door. So compensatory damages is what we mainly go after. And we're getting there over time. We have some more assets that we're going after right now. We helped do some work on the 650 Fifth Avenue case where the New York government, we went after this. So Iran had a foundation called ASA Corporation, or ASA Foundation, and they built a building on Fifth Avenue for their purposes. Just happens to be the same exact building, and across the street, it's a copy of Jared Kushner's building that was in the news. And so it's gotten some attention lately. But the New York government, we went after it multiple times, and the New York government finally said, yeah, they're not using it for foundation purposes, and they're seizing it. And so over time, we've made a deal with the New York government to work with them to go after that building, liquidate it, and provide all of the cash from the liquidation to victims of terrorism. Right now, they're still appealing that, and right now it's in the Second Circuit. And then and we're going after the rest of that money that is in an electronic fund transaction as well. And we're lobbying Congress to make it so that AFTs still count as jurisdiction of the United States, that, you know, once the money touches base here and it still has a United States account number on it, it's still money that was, and it's still in dollars, that's still U.S. money, and we can get that. And hopefully we will be successful in that too. And
the thing in that is where is the dollar located? You know, the real fact of the matter is that it has an amount on it and so forth and so on, but it's just a piece of paper with something printed on it.
Well, and it's an electronic entry. As all of you know, when you go to the bank, all of your numbers are just electronic entries nowadays.
Yeah.
The banks don't carry cash anymore like they used to.
Years back, my first job really out of law school was for a short time. I worked as a resident counsel in a bank, and the president of the bank took me out to lunch about the first day, and he said, you realize that 97% of the dollars in the United States are just electronic entries of banks? And I said, what? I said, only 3% is real? Yeah, and 97% are just electronic entries on the bank's records. Oh my God.
So how has the Iranian government reacted? Are they big fans of yours, or?
That would be a no.
We haven't planned on a vacation over there. I did have a guy who was working for the government, the FBI, listening in on all kinds of communications over in Iran, and he called me up and he said that your name was mentioned today on the floor of the Iranian parliament. And I said, yeah, and they said, yeah, and they said that you were, what was the term?
I don't
yeah, it's something like
gangster.
Yeah, and
well,
a vicious something or other.
Yeah, nothing nice.
Jeez, and I said, well, did he talk about money? If he wants to talk about money, call him back. And
well, when these cases started, terrorism was actually a budget item in their budget in Iran. Just like when we pass our budget with Congress, when they pass their budget, terrorism was literally a line item in there. They don't do it anymore.
We'll now do questions and answers. So what I'd like you to do as I come around is just please stand up, and then you have to speak right into the top of the microphone.
Okay. Can you hear me? I wanted to know if there were reciprocal lawsuits against the U.S. for collateral damage during strikes in terrorism-related events. If we were at war with Iran, officially at war, could you still collect damages for bad things? And do other countries sue us for collateral damage in their countries when we accidentally strike a school or a hospital?
Yeah. Any country can do exactly what we did. Iran did have claims against the United States having to do with the embassy in Iran. And I believe the United States paid a portion of it. I don't think they paid all of it.
They filed some stuff with regard to their holdings in the United States that they claim were all diplomatic holdings. Maybe so. I don't know that they really needed to have a couple of houses in Chicago, for instance. I doubt very much if there's much having to do with Iran legitimately in Chicago. But the U.S. government has done everything to try and protect the real property that Iran has in the United States. I think the feeling is that we'll never get back to having diplomatic relations and get on an even path with Iran otherwise. And I don't know that I agree with that. When they went and killed the first American that we represent, so far as I'm concerned, whatever we get in a judgment and wherever they have something here, I think it should be that we should be able to take it. We're not spilling one drop of Iranian blood. All we are doing is getting compensation for the people who are victims of the crimes that they've committed.
I know Canada has passed an anti-terrorism law, so citizens in Canada can make claims, and we can ride off of Canada's laws to go after assets in Canada, but it's to a certain date, which doesn't include the Beirut case. And France is considering one right now. The UK is considering one currently as well. I think that's it. I don't think any other country has actual anti-terrorism laws for civil actions yet.
We may be able to do something more in France on the same day as the attack on the Marine barracks, in which 241 Marines, there's some sailors and soldiers that included in that 241, died. There was an attack on the French barracks as well. I think the number killed there was something like 78 or something like that.
I think it was 58.
58. But they had people killed in that attack too. And I don't have any objection to them collecting compensation from Iran for those lives too.
I guess it's not your case, but after 9/11, there were lawsuits against Saudi Arabia. Do you know what the status of that is? I know they passed some legislation that the Saudis did not like recently.
I'm afraid that with the present administration, there's not going to be anything done against Saudi Arabia. To be frank about it, there are a lot of things that Saudi Arabia has done over the years that, as the saying goes, we're not strictly kosher by any means. Not just this guy who unfortunately recently lost his life, but they've done a number of things like that. And I don't think it's a wise idea having them as our partners in that part of the world. But that's not the way the present administration seems to think.
Hi, my question's rather similar, but just legally, how do you distinguish between war and terrorism? And secondly, I guess there's about 200 countries in the world. So how much, you've touched on it briefly, but how much of this is going on between, like, between India and Pakistan? Or because, I mean, there's terrorist activities all over the world. But legally, how do you distinguish between war and terrorism?
Well, any terrorist attack can bring forth a war. I mean, we could have declared war on Iran after the attack on the Marine barracks. We were not at war with Iran, and they went and killed 241 of our people. There are a number of people in the military that think we should have. I don't know what all the details on what the let's say the situation was across the military, that they were ready to go to war, but I think we would have been justified in declaring war on them. If you want to exist amongst the nations of the world, you don't exist by going and killing 241 of their people. That's a warlike act that would have deserved a declaration of war, even though we didn't do it.
The definition of terrorism is innocent non-combatants.
Yeah.
In war, technically, so under our Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act statute, as it stands right now, it would be hard during acts of war to make a claim for a plaintiff. Plus, add on to it, the country has to be on the state-sponsored list of states that sponsor terrorism. There's a lot of elements to the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act that you have to follow that just directly deal with terrorism directly, and anything having to do with war is excluded from it.
Who's on the list now?
Iran, Sudan, there's 7 total. Iran's, North Korea, Iraq was, and now they're off. And sometimes they go, huh?
No.
Nope.
There have
Libya's
been-
not on it anymore.
It isn't to say there
Libya has
haven't been
been taken
problems
off.
from time to time with the Russians, although some of them, like years ago when there was an airliner, a South Korean airliner, shot down and crashed into the ocean off there. That airliner probably was over Soviet airspace. There are some readings of what the agreements are with them that would be justified. There are others that are not. Once they come in within your space with regard to the water or the over top of land and so forth, it becomes an open question. I think that was not a wise idea on the part of the Russians. They ended up not benefiting from that at all. But
Saudi Arabia is not on that list either. That's why there is a separate bill for Saudi Arabia, the JASTA bill. They're treated differently. They don't fall under the regular Foreign Sovereign Immunity Act claims.
So right now, those are the countries that you could sue.
Yes, for a terrorist act, for injuries as a result of a terrorist act.
It's so political, it changes all the time.
Yes, it does. And at any given moment, the president can also sign an executive order completely getting rid of these cases altogether. Our government has complete control over these cases of whether we last or not. Usually we just get ignored. Sometimes we get an executive order against us and we lose cases. But sometimes we also get executive orders that help us too, that say, Obama wrote one for our case when we were going after the assets, saying, yes, these assets are frozen and these people can get them. So it just depends on the administration, and it bounces all over the place. It's hard to tell who's going to go which way.
it's hard to define how far an executive order can go. Before we were at war with Germany in 1941, President Roosevelt signed a declaration, permitted under the statutes, signed a declaration expanding the U.S., the waters of the United States, and it was all of the waters east of a line, or west of a line, which started on the eastern end of Iceland and went to the South Pole. The head of the German Navy wrote a thing saying, "This man thinks big. With one stroke of the pen, he's eaten 2/3 of the Atlantic Ocean." Well, Roosevelt was that way.
Here's another question.
First of all, thank you for trying to bring some form of justice to a lot of people who otherwise would not have a voice, and I do appreciate that. Picking up, I think, on what we've been talking about here, there's a political dimension to this that is probably as important, maybe even more important, than the legal dimension. And can you speak a little bit to not only what can be done domestically, but also what can be done internationally to bring a little bit more clarity and a little bit more strength to the actions you're trying to take?
You can make a comparison between what happened after the election of 1940, when it looked like the United States was going to war, and of course eventually it did the next year, and what happens now. After the election in 1940, which was narrowly won by Franklin Roosevelt, the Republican nominee, Wendell Willkie, went up to the White House, and Roosevelt signed an order designating him as his man and sent him over to Great Britain to talk about the British and design some stuff so that we could keep Britain from being overrun. The present administration doesn't even talk to anyone in the opposing party. Nothing happens there. I mean, if it's at some point that there's a real disagreement on, seems like a disagreement is built up. It really doesn't make any sense. And should we ever get in another real all-out war, we need every American to be on the side of whoever is the president. So,
well, I think it depends on the state. For instance, Sudan is on our terrorism list, but Sudan has been participating with our government, and our United States no longer has sanctions against Sudan and has been working with Sudan. Sudan has been working really hard to get off the terrorism list. But our country, the United States, makes requirements to get off that terrorism list of things that you have to do. I think if every administration picked up the same book and stuck to the same letter of the law and said, you don't get off the list until you pay all these judgments, and you don't get off this list until you make a promise of anti-terrorism, I think that would be a huge step. But of course, that depends on the administration that's in office at the moment. Like I said, every administration, whether it's Democrat or Republican, kind of bounces all over the place on this issue. It's hard for us to figure out what we're doing next. On enforcement, we don't even look at whether it's Republican or Democrat anymore. It's what are his policies? What is he going to enforce? What kind of sanctions is he going to push? And it's all over the place nowadays. The world is turned into a very complicated place, and I think it depends on what state you're dealing with. Iran, I don't think there is any chance of us coming to resolution with them on any of those issues. But who knows? Maybe Iran will have a revolution and things will change, and yep, they have done it before.
Any other questions? Yep.
I just want to know, how do you educate yourself for this? It's international tort law? I mean, what do you do?
Good question. That's why, so when my dad started these cases, he had and still has a partner, Steve Perlis, and he mainly just does the international law side, whereas my dad was the civil tort lawyer who did the trial.
Who also does covert action in Cyprus and Lebanon.
Well, he had to get testimony so that he would win in trial.
Yeah.
When you're a trial lawyer, you have to get the testimony. Otherwise, why are you going to trial? But yeah, it's a funky mix of international law, tort law, and politics.
Yep, one more.
I just want to know if these cases are ever or frequently defended on the merits by the government of a terrorist state, and if so, what the nature of their defense is.
Yes. The
African embassy
cases
are against Sudan, and Sudan has defended them.
They hired counsel. They filed motions to dismiss. Their motions were denied. The thing went up on appeal. The Court of Appeals, United States Court of Appeals, the D.C. Circuit, held against them. I believe they petitioned for cert. That was denied too. And then I don't think they quite understood the American system. They ordered their lawyer to keep resisting everything, but they told him they weren't going to pay him anymore. I don't know how he put it, but I suspect there's something along the lines of, "Hey, no green is to be seen. You're not going to see me either."
Yeah, the Sudan has claimed all kinds of defenses against us. They've won on some of the cases, throwing them out for statute of limitations issues or bad service issues. A lot of other lawyers that have picked up these cases over the years, service is an issue with these. You literally have to follow the law, and it takes us a year to get service against these countries, and you have to follow it to the T. And if you don't, you could get kicked later. And so the Sudan has come back on certain cases and claimed that they didn't do proper service. So cases that have had judgments for 5 years are now getting dismissed because they didn't do service properly on their complaint.
The question was designed to ask, or I don't know if you can answer it, do any of these rogue states claim that the conduct that led to the disaster plane crashes or Marine barracks were the result of rogue actors within the state as opposed to the state itself? In other words, how do you establish the liability of the state as opposed to the individuals who may not be acting, as you have to prove, under the auspices of the state?
That they're not agents or instrumentalities is what it would be. I believe Sudan has claimed that in the past, but they got nowhere with it because they didn't have anything to back it up. But then on enforcement side, when we go after the banks for doing bad acts with countries with Iran, they claim that. That they didn't have anything to do with it. They didn't know that name meant that name. It was an Arab name. How are they supposed to know? They claim complete innocence, even though they're not.
When Gaddafi was alive, he had been claiming that the plane that was brought down in Scotland, killing everyone on board, was none of his business, and a couple of other things. And that didn't work out too well, and for a long time, the U.S. government just took the position that they didn't know why. I don't know what exactly they knew, but what had happened in that was the U.S. government actually got information from an officer of the East German secret police who had intercepted stuff and that they were planning on blowing up not only this but some other things and passing it on to the United States. And I don't know what the guy's full name was. That was passed on to me, but there was some action there. done by him. I think he deserves a lot of credit for sticking his neck out to try and save the lives of a lot of Americans.
Any other questions? I have one. Do they still have line item entries on the
No.
budget for terrorism?
No.
So do you think that this has had a deterrent effect, or has it forced them to be more sneaky in setting up terrorist activities? Is it deterring, or is it making them cunning?
We haven't the attacks that have taken place recently, Iran involving Americans. Iran hasn't been involved over the last couple of years.
That we know of.
That we know of. There's no way to prove or disprove that they did anything. I suspect they didn't do anything, because I think they've probably had a meeting and sat down and said, look, you add up all of this, and this isn't getting us anywhere. But that's just my guesstimate. There's no way to be sure of that.
We like to think that it's deterring them. That's why Congress said that Americans could sue a state that sponsors terrorism in hopes that it will deter them from continuing these bad acts. So I hope.
Yeah. All right, last call for questions. So let me just, I'm a lawyer too, I'm going to talk now.
Okay.
The thing, one of the duties of an attorney is to be a zealous advocate for his or her clients. This guy flies to a foreign country with an alias, secret covert operations, as you were saying, to get information to build a case. That's zealous. That's what an advocate can be. This is really going above and beyond the call of duty, to fight not only for the victims, but for the rule of law around the world. The idea is that you shouldn't be able to hide behind anonymous masked figures shooting up or blowing up or bombing innocent civilians around the world and get away with it. This is groundbreaking law. And see what I mean also about hearing the juice and the vitality and the stories behind all this stuff? You won't read this when you read the legal decisions upholding the right to sue or to collect. This is from the horse's mouths. So it really is my great honor. Now, that's the end of my summation. And we can talk forever about the War Powers Act and the role of Congress in declaring war and official state declarations of war versus guerrilla wars. It's a fascinating intersection of war and terrorism and law and politics. This is being played out around the world, and these two are at the forefront of it. As you leave, we have our museum brochure, and contained within it is a 6-page document that Tom and Caragh have prepared. You can take one of those as you go. I also want to invite you all to our next program. John Barelick will be here on December 6th. He was involved, remember that terrible nightclub fire in Rhode Island? I think it was Great White, and the pyrotechnics, and so many people died. John was the lawyer that represented him and did what is, I'm told, fire science, reconstructing how that thing went so he could win for the families of the people that died. That's coming up next month. If it's going to be the same suggested donation of $20. If you sign up tonight, you get in for 25% discount, just because we'd like to get a better head count. And that should be another great, remarkable program. So you're all welcome to do that. Now, as you leave, we're going to have people stationed. You can take the handout, and then Tom and Caragh and I will be out here for about 30 minutes or so if you'd like to mingle and chat. Thank you all very much for coming. It's been a pleasure.